Hey everybody. This lecture is going to continue from the abstraction in JSON layouts lecture that I uploaded earlier. And what we're going to do in this lecture is we're going to change the structure of the application to use multiple activities. What we do with these activities is not such a big deal, but I've decided what I'll do is I'll change this list so that instead of listing all the cars, it's just going to list the different brands, right? So you can see I've got this car, which is a Toyota, this one is a Toyota, and this one is Dafchins. I should have picked a pronounceable name when I was putting random data into my database. But basically, I've got two brands available, Toyota and Dafchins. So what I want the app to do is on this home page, it's just going to list the brands rather than the individual cars. And then when I click on a brand, it's going to take me to a new screen, a new activity that's going to display all the cars that correspond to that brand. Okay. So I'm going to continue from the project we did earlier, and it's in the Android alternative. But again, if you're working in Android rather than the Android alternative, everything should work fine. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to need to do is I've currently got a JSON file that has all of this data in it, right? Now, what I want is just a list of brands. So I'm going to create a new PHP file. So I'm going to open my file browser. If you're on Windows, you can use WinSCP. That's probably the best program for it. In Linux, every file browser has something like a connect to server. This is just the default Ubuntu one. And what I'm going to type in, okay, so it's hard to see, is sftp:/lamp.ms.vets.ac.za//provesh/public_html. Okay. Now, on my computer, the username and password are saved, so it didn't ask me. But on yours, the first time you do it, it'll ask you for your username and password. And if you're working on your own machine, you can tell it to remember the password so it won't ask you again. But then it'll pop up the list of files which are on the server. They're not on your computer. And the plus side is it'll present them as if they're on your computer. So you can edit them just like you can edit any normal file, and there's nothing weird to do, you know. So what I'm going to do is I can see my cars.php and it just says select star from cars. I'm going to make a copy of it and I'm going to call it maybe getBrands.php because now I just want to list the brands. Okay. And all I'm going to change is the query so that instead of listing star from cars, it's going to select brand from cars. Okay. And if I then in my browser change it to getBrands.php, you'll see now I only get a list of brands. But the problem here is I don't want to see Toyota twice. I want a list of all the brands. I don't need to see any individual brand more than once. So I'm going to put in the keyword distinct, which what it'll do is then not allow duplicates. So it'll only show me every brand once. Okay. I'm not sure if you've done that in the databases course, but now you know about it. It's the keyword distinct. And then what I'm going to do in this thing is instead of calling cars in my Java file, I'm going to call getBrands. Okay. And if I go back here and I run it, it will fail miserably. Okay. And if I look at it, it'll tell me why it failed is because it was looking for a JSON object called number. The reason is I used the same process JSON I used earlier, which I was using when I got an entire car object back. So now I'm going to change this thing to public void process brands, and I'm going to change it to just deal with the brands, right? And so here I'm going to say process brands. Because I'm lazy, I'm going to copy all of this and put it in here. But now instead of using a car layout, because the trouble with a car layout was that it had a number, an owner, and a brand, I'm going to make something called a car brand layout, which I'm just going to make by copying this class, and maybe I'll call it car brand layout. It doesn't really matter. And since this one only has a brand, I'm going to take out the number and the owner. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just put the brand where the number was, which was on the left, if you remember correctly. And I can take out the layout that was on the right because it doesn't do anything, right? In the populate, I have to take out the number and the owner because I've just got brand. Oh man, okay. I don't know if you guys can see what I did. I accidentally edited car layout instead of car brand layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this code into car brand layout because I've messed them up. And this constructor will now be car brand layout. And then I want car layout the way it was, so I'm just going to undo like a lot. And then hopefully it gets back to where it was reasonable. Then in main activity, this thing here now I'm going to use a car brand layout instead of a car layout in process brands. And when I run it now, it gives me a list of brands. And if there were more than 2, I'd get that same blue and white alternating structure, right? So now I've got a list of the brands that are in my system. And what I want to do with those is I want to actually, when I click on one, I want to go to a new activity corresponding to that brand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new activity. Okay, so if I'm in the Android alternative, which I am, I can say new class. However, if you're in Android Studio, you'll right click on the package name and say new activity. Okay. In the Android alternative, we just say new class. I'm going to call it maybe car list activity or something, because it's going to list the cars that are of a particular brand. That doesn't really matter. Now in Android Studio, you'll get a template. You'll get an activity that has an onCreate and everything. In the Android alternative, you'll have to manually say extends activity because you want it to extend the activity class. And then you'll have to say add unimplemented methods and it'll add an onCreate method. Now what you do in the onCreate method is, well, I'm just going to copy the top of the onCreate of the main activity, which just set up an activity and put the word stuff in there so that I could recognize that things that happened. So let's change this from stuff to car list or something. And that just made another activity. Now, when I click on a brand, I want it to go to that activity. Now, the technology that Android uses for this is called intents. And how it works is we say like intent I equals new intent, and we give it the activity that we're coming from. So in this case, main activity.this, and that's an object, right? It's the actual activity that we're on. And then we give it the class of an activity that we want to go to. Now this is not an object, it's a class directly, and it will create the object. It will call the constructor and create an object and launch it. To actually launch it though, we have to say start activity with the intent. Okay, so if I reload, say run, I get Toyota and Dachshunds. If I click on Dachshunds, I get to my other activity that says car list. If I click back, I'll get back to the one that has Toyota and Dachshunds, right? I'm not sure why the formatting is going wrong, but anyway. So I've got my activity mostly working. When I get to the other activity though, I want to let's make another text view. And I just want to, for the moment, just to test that everything's working, I just want to print out the brand that I had previously clicked on. Okay, so when I clicked on Toyota, I wanted it just to write the word Toyota here to show me that it knew where I came from. In order to do that, I need to send a variable to the other activity, right? So here I can say maybe string brand equals jo.get string brand, right? That'll get me the brand that I want to send on. Then what I'll have to do is I'll have to say I.put extra, and then this is now the key that I want to put. So this is the name of the variable, right? So it's going to be brand, and this is the value. So it's the value of the variable. So it's going to be the variable brand. I don't know if that made sense to everyone, but basically this is the name of the variable. So it's the literal string brand. This one is what the value is. So in this case, it's the brand I got from the JSON string, which is probably going to be something like Toyota. Then in my car list activity, I can say intent j equals get intent, and that'll get me the intent that was used to create this activity. I can then set the text of this thing to j.getString extra of brand. Okay, so that'll mean that I now went and got the brand out of the intent. That was only possible because over here I put the brand into the intent. Okay, so if I go here, say run, and that means okay, I'm getting some sort of error. Let's see what happens. Unresolved. Okay. I can't call both of these text views T. So it was an unresolved compilation problem. It is in fact highlighted in red on Eclipse. I just didn't notice it. So I'm going to call it T2. These are very bad variable names. No, let me not call it T2 because that's a really terrible name. I'll call it text view brand. And then I'll reload, and if I click on Toyota now, I get car lists, and okay, I need to add view brand. Yes, I'm not rehearsing these things in the hope that it gives you guys an idea of what the coding process looks like. And as you can see, most of it is screwing up and then unscrewing up. So now you can see it listed the actual brand. And if I clicked on Toyota, the car list would say Toyota. Okay. So that basically allowed us to create a new activity and to put the variable to send variables between the two activities. A common reason you might want to do this is maybe you've got like a login activity, but then your next activity needs to know what user ID or username you are, so you have to send the variable into the next activity. Similarly, if you want to like view a profile, like you clicked on someone's name and you want to see their profile, you're going to do exactly what we did here. Now the next thing is that I actually want to view the list of cars that corresponds to that activity. So what I want to do is I want to do a web request, which I already know how to do. I just make a PHP request object, and then I call rec.toRequest. And now it's not going to be main activity.this, it's going to be just this, or if you want car list activity.this. And what I'm going to call for now is cars.php. And I already had a way of processing the JSON that comes back from cars.php. So I'm going to paste that in here, and then I'm going to call process JSON. That process JSON added items to a linear layout called container. So that means I actually need this container activity to be in my car list activity as well. And I'll need to add it to my content layout in the same way that I did on the previous activity. So now I've got no errors. So there's some chance that this will work. So I click on Toyota. I get a list of all cars, right? Which is not quite what I wanted. I only wanted Toyotas. Okay. And this is where things are going to get a little complicated. So you guys already built cars2.php, which allowed you to filter by brand. Okay. So fundamentally what that was like was I could say cars2.php, no, cars2.php question mark brand equals Toyota. And that would only show me the Toyotas, right? So you guys did this in, I think it was lab 6.1 or something. So we're just going to use that code. So now instead of calling cars, I'm going to call cars2. The problem with this is that I haven't sent it the brand. Like, so it's fundamentally equivalent to just calling cars2.php directly, which will return an error, right? If you don't give it those parameters, the brand in particular, then it's going to say, what are you doing? So the problem we have is that our PHP request doesn't currently allow us to put parameters. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to Google, I'm going to say add post parameters in OK HTTP. And that gets me a Stack Overflow thing, and I'm going to look through it, find the error. Okay, so I see there's an error here that says I need to make a multi-part form body if I want to set a MIME request, but I don't really want to do that. Okay, here's an OK HTTP 3 example. It says I need to create a request body and then call .post on that form body. Don't worry too much if you don't follow this completely. The code will be sitting in this project and you'll be able to take a look at it. So in the PHP request, my request now needs to be able to put variables in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this code here, and you'll see that its .add allows us to add whatever the request parameters are. But I don't want those request parameters to be hard-coded in PHP request, because PHP request needs to be usable for every possible request, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a hash map called a content values, and it's going to store the parameters, and I'm going to require my the class that's doing the request to send me a content values. Okay. Now a content values looks like almost like a JSON string. It has every item in the content values has a key and a value. The key is the variable name and the value is the variable value. So I'm going to replace these adds with adds that come from the params, right? So I'm going to change this from being a request body to being a form body.builder equals new form body.builder, right? And this is just because I don't want to do all of this in one line, because I don't have the I don't have all of these parameters at the start. So I'm going to say form body.builder builder equals new form body.builder. Then what I want to do is iterate over all the variables that are in my content values, because remember it can store names and values of variables. So I'm going to say for string s in, okay, for string key. So I'm going to iterate over all the keys, meaning the variable names, in my params. So in params.keySet. So that says iterate over all variables in the content values. And what I want to do is I want to say builder.add key. So taking the same key from the content values and adding it to the builder. And I want to get the value from the content values and add it to the builder as well. So what I've done now is I've added the I've taken all the variables from this content values and I've added them to the form builder. Then it says I need to call .post on that variable. So over here, I'm going to say .post builder.build. Now I had to say .build. Why I had to say .build is because there was this .build which I commented out over here, right? So now I'm sending variables in this content values. So what I have to do is in my main activity, which called get brands didn't have any parameters, right? So I'm going to say content values CV equals new content values to create a key value store. I'm not even going to put anything in it, and I'm going to say I'm going to send it CV. So I'm sending it an empty CV and empty content values because and it actually goes after get brands. I'm giving it an empty content values because it doesn't take any parameters, right? But in my car list activity, I'm going to do a similar thing, but I'm going to say content values CV equals new content values. And then I'm going to say, CV.put, and then the name of my variable is brand. And the value of my brand is actually going to be the brand value that came back from the intent. Okay. Okay, but brand is a text view, so that's not a good idea. So I'm going to say brand and then j.getString extra brand. Okay, I could do that. I think a better way to do it is to change this thing to like brand view, because that's the text view containing the brand. So you'll see I actually got confused when I was coding, and whenever that happens to you, that probably means you've named something incorrectly or your structure is wrong, right? So I'm going to make a variable called brand, which just goes and gets it from the string extra, and I'm going to say brand value that set text brand so that it it uses the brand value that it got, and now I'm going to put brand in there. Okay. Then I'm going to send the CV into the PHP request, right? Now, again, that was a lot of work because we had to modify this PHP request in order to handle parameters that we're going to send in, right? In order to handle these like things after the question mark, right? But now that it's done, we'll never have to think about it again. Whenever we subsequently use a request, we're just going to make one of these content values objects and put in the keys and values of the variables that need to be sent to the function. So it's going to make life a little easier. Okay, so now we're going to run this thing. We're going to get a list of brands. We're going to click on it. We're going to get Toyota. And now you'll see we've got only Toyotas in there. If I go back and I click on Dachshunds, I'll get only the Dachshunds. So what happened was that it sent the brand into my cars2.php, and cars2.php only returned the right items. Okay. So I've done multiple activities, and I've made the second activity respond to something that came in from the first activity. Okay, now, yeah, I hope that helps a lot. One of the bigger things is that you can edit your PHP files from a nice interface rather than from Nano or Pico. Okay, thank you all for listening.